Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Off the Hook with Matty D. I am your host, Matt DiNardo. And if you're in the western part of Virginia, you have probably heard about this guiding outfit. But if you're in the eastern part or central part, unless you're really a diehard, you might not have. But I hope you have, because what they're catching between smallmouth and muskie and other outings is incredible. I'm talking about Virginia Trophy Guides, and my guest tonight on Off the Hook with Matty D is Austin Conrad. Austin, thanks so much for joining me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it, Matt.
So I kind of hinted at this. You are in the western part of the state, kind of based in Roanoke, but you don't really fish in Roanoke. You fish many areas. Let's just talk about your general area of fishing first.
Yeah, so the company's based out of Roanoke, and it's nice because it splits the difference between our predominant fisheries, and we're looking at the Upper James, the Lower New, the Upper New, and then some of the tributaries to both rivers that we're doing most of our fishing on. And so it's nice, Roanoke's a cool town, but most of our fishing, or all of our fishing, doesn't happen in the city of Roanoke.
Right. And so I'm going to roll back here for just a second. When did you first get into fishing as a young kid? Did you start middle teenage years? And was it fly fishing first, or spin casting, or just everything above all of it?
Yeah, so I grew up in southern West Virginia, actually, and so a town called Oak Hill. It's right next to Fayetteville, West Virginia, which everybody seems to know. Normally when I tell people, I'm actually like, I'm from Fayetteville, and then they're like, oh, I know where that is. And that's the New River Gorge. So, that's a spot that a lot of people are familiar with, because if you're outdoorsy at all, it's a destination, from rafting to rock climbing, mountain biking, whatever. And then fishing. So, I grew up, my grandfather and his good buddy, Joey, were the ones who taught me how to fish. And I think, like most kids, until I was, almost a teenager, it was less than serious, but I always enjoyed doing it. I wouldn't have said that it was something that I was, just dying to do every day and that kind of story. But once I hit my teen years, I really enjoyed going to do it, and I think I liked spending time with my grandfather and his friends and my other family doing it, my brother and whatnot. So they had a fish camp on a tributary to the New River that I spent a lot of time at, whether it was just recreating or fishing. And no, I didn't grow up fly fishing. On the other side of my family, we had a guy that we referred to as our Uncle Joe, Joe Lewis, and he would fly fish on the Greenbrier in the New River in West Virginia. And I always loved it. Like, I thought it looked really cool, but I never touched a fly rod until I was an adult, almost in college. So, so spin fishing, conventional tackle, even bait fishing is how I grew up fishing predominantly in southern West Virginia, fishing for smallmouth and trout primarily. My grandfather did some muskie fishing, cat fishing, but didn't do a lot of that with him as a youth. But yeah, so grew up doing that, and kind of fell in love with fly fishing in college. Went to college at Penn State and worked for a fly shop there when I was in college. And I think that kind of fostered my love for not only fly fishing, but the idea of guiding and spending my time with people and in instruction, and Yeah,
and I think that was right leading to my next question is, so how did you get interested in guiding? Were you working in the fly shop and somebody came in and said, hey, I've never done this before, and you're like, well, I could take you out, let me show you? Or was it kind of like a slow progression?
Yeah, so it was like more so as I was leaving college that I started guiding, and just kind of seamlessly did it from PA to Virginia. So when I moved back to Virginia, started guiding here. I was doing some trout stuff, some walk and wade stuff, primarily, and then went to Alaska pretty seamlessly from there. It all just seemed to kind of happen really quickly. Worked for the fly fishing film tour for a few years and did that in the winters. And then when I first went to Alaska is how I met Josh, the other owner of Virginia Trophy Guides. And I knew I wanted to do bass and muskie here. I was, super aware of who he was, but did not know Josh, personally. And we worked at the same lodge in Alaska. And so I kind of approached him about it and, said that it was something I wanted to do. I didn't want to step on anybody's toes out there and, make any waves. And he was super receptive, and he kind of had a need for a second guide. And he was kind of working under just his own name at that point. He had owned a couple guide services beforehand and was just guiding clients he's had for a long time. And then as he was getting busier, he had a need. And then we've grown ever since. So
that was kind of the beginning of Virginia Trophy Guides. And so it's you and Josh. And I believe now you have a little bit more of a group because you've grown, like you said.
Yeah. So there's 4 of us now, which is great. Business has grown and we are booking trips every day. We're extremely busy during the spring. We're extremely busy during the winter for muskie. And then during the summer, I lose all 3 of those boys' names. Joe is the newest guide, and him included. They go to Alaska. Joe goes to a different lodge in Alaska on the Kenai, and then Braden and Josh Braden's actually leaving for Costa Rica tomorrow, and he's guiding there a little bit before he leaves for Alaska. But him and Josh work at the same lodge that I met Josh at and worked at for a few seasons. So in the summer, I'm busy because it's just me. I would say that it's one of those things where the summer bass program, I think, we don't advertise it as much for having the guides here. So it's something that eventually I think one of those fellows is going to have to come back and help me out a bit, because despite the fact that I don't advertise for it, we've continued to grow, very quickly. And eventually I think we got to have at least a second guy here. But yeah, so it's one of those things where there's 4 of us and, we're humming from December 1st through June 1st. Those boys just left for Alaska.
Right.
And they worked pretty much every day leading up to, except for a couple days before. And I'm sure they were, thrilled about that. Trying to frantically pack for a 4-month season.
4 months,
in
right?
2 days. Yeah.
And we'll talk about Alaska coming up a little bit later on. So, okay, so in Virginia or West Virginia, you're fishing the New River. What other rivers are kind of the rivers that you guide on? I'm sure there's many.
Yeah, so we actually only guide in Virginia itself. Okay. I'm from West Virginia. But,
okay.
But yeah, we guide in Virginia here on the New River, both the lower and the upper. And then we guide on the upper James River. So pretty much from its headwaters to roughly, Balcony Falls area. And then, a couple of the smaller tributaries around or that feed into both rivers. So, we historically, Josh and I did some trout guiding on the Smith and the Jackson. We no longer do it. We just stay busy enough. And honestly, we prefer to smallmouth and musky fish over trout fishing. So we kind of just killed that program. And a lot of it was just, we were spread thin, and you start working all these different places. And we kind of pride ourselves on having a really intimate knowledge of those 2 primary fisheries because we're on them every day.
Right.
Between the 4 of us, there's somebody out, or at least 2 or 3 of us out, from December to June 1st on the New or the James River. And we communicate every day, everything we've seen. I grew up on the New River. Josh grew up on both the New and the James. And so we have a, intimate knowledge of those fisheries. So, yeah.
Yeah.
But those are the primary. If you're seeing smallmouth or muskie, those are
the ones.
Right.
Fishing. And I was just showing some of the pictures that you have supplied me with, and these are no smallmouths. I mean, these are beautiful fish, and there's even some larger ones. So you kind of hinted at it there. Your primary species that you're targeting are smallmouth and muskie. You kind of gave up on the trout just because this is a little bit more action packed. It's a bigger fish. It's a better fight. Was that kind of the thinking, or was it just like those two rivers, the New and the James, like it was just all the time you can get into fish?
I think this might upset some people, but I think Josh and I we were sick of trout. I mean, between
no.
PA and
Right.
growing up fishing for trout and stuff. And yeah, if I'm going to be out for 8, 10, 12 hours in a day with clients, I'd much rather watch them catch 18 to 22 inch smallmouth or, muskie up to 50 plus inches.
Right.
It just, that's what gets me, excited. And I think that it also doesn't hurt that smallmouth are kind of the in fish right now. I'm not aware of that. But there's a reason they are. And I think people are catching on to it, is that smallmouth might be in freshwater the perfect fish for a fly rod, because they're going to eat from the top to the bottom just like trout, and they fight so much harder pound for pound. And the eats are cooler, I think, personally, and that's just me. But I think people are starting to catch on to it, and they're in a lot more watersheds in Virginia. We guide in the western part of the state, but all the way to Richmond there's smallmouth bass, and you can catch big smallmouth bass in the videos that are running behind you right now, and so I mean that's what's cool about smallmouth, is they're a lot more agreeable for watersheds than trout are, especially the wild variety of trout. So
And then is there a season for smallmouth? Because I know there's a breeding time, so I'm assuming you don't attack them while they're breeding and building their reds and stuff like that.
Yeah, so I'll answer that second part, first, and then get into the first part because it's a little longer. But yeah, so just like trout, I think trout get a lot of the respect of anglers that bass don't, and that's more so at the conventional side of smallmouth bass anglers, which we run conventional trips as well, but I'm more talking about recreational anglers and whatnot. Kind of the bass tournament scene created this culture around fishing, bass on beds, which is damaging to the fishery. And so we're never targeting smallmouth on beds because much like trout or most other fish, they spawn in stages. So, May 1st, when I'm running a trip, there's going to be fish that are post-spawn, spawning, and pre-spawn still. And so what's great about that is I can go to places that are not spawning flats, not spawning areas, and I can still target not only smallmouth, but the larger variety of smallmouth in those kind of feeding zones, post-spawn or pre-spawn. And that fish right there is a really big fish. That fish in our systems is going to spawn first. A lot of times you'll start to see those really big fish. That fish was 21 and a half inches long, and we don't weigh him, but
I mean the girth also looks like it's 21 and a half inches around too.
That's a giant, that's a fish of a lifetime, and what's nice about the fisheries that we're in, the New and the James, is that they're world-class large smallmouth fisheries. Your average fish is going to be 12, 14 inches long, sure, but we grow the longest smallmouth, some of the longest smallmouth in the country, in Virginia. The New is notorious for it. The Susquehanna in Pennsylvania is notorious for it. The Allegheny, the James, and so it's one of those things where, I can target those fish with clients, and not target spawning areas. So that's your season. Your spawning season is typically going to be from your third week of April. Typically, maybe you'll get some of those freakishly large fish that are spawning a little earlier, second week of April, especially if we're getting a really warm spring and not a lot of precipitation, which we had earlier in the spring. And then all of a sudden I was like, please turn off the water. But, it's that'll cause them to spawn quick, low clear water. And then, you're getting 80-degree days, 85-degree days, mid-April. That's going to kick things in high gear. Right. So year to year, it's going to change. But for the most part, or always, something that's not going to change is the fact that they spawn in stages. Second part of that is our bass season goes from pretty much late February, early March, safely I would say early March, through October.
Okay.
And then, so what's nice about our fisheries, our program, what we love doing is that we go seamlessly from bass into muskie and back and forth a couple times, during during the year as well. So May and June, I'll get some overlap with clients where I'll be running a muskie trip post spawn one day, and then a smallmouth trip the next day. And then same with October. I don't start fishing for muskie again until after the water is dropped below a certain temperature. And so in October, I'll be running a muskie trip one day, then a smallmouth trip the next. So, and then, obviously you get into, the really hard winter days, your November, which late fall, winter, and then into late February. That's our muskie season. But March 1st through about October 1st, October 15th, depending on the year, is our smallmouth season. And that's what I'm in the throes of right now. We had a fantastic spring, and I'm getting ready to rock into summer.
Right. And in summertime, is it a lot of top water because of the ecosystem, the bugs, the warm weather? I mean, everything is just flourishing. And are you just like killing it on top water, or are you still looking mid-water column at that point too?
Yeah. So the into late June, they're still heavy on a bait fish bite. And I mean, you can catch smallies on the new particularly, and the James on small bait fish flies, all summer. But, right now we're kind of in that transitional zone where, the water's dry, and it's all depending, it's week to week, day to day. We're coming down off of a high water event. So they were smashing big flies again, 5-6 inch flies. And then we're kind of low and clearing out here now. And so I guarantee, I go back out tomorrow, it'll be some topwater bait fish, some boogle bugging, some small bait fish patterns, 3-4 inches or, 2 to 4 inches.
Right.
And yeah, but they're heavy on that bait fish bite, where we are until about the end of June. And then as it gets really hot in July and low and clear, we start finessing them. The guys that are diehard bug fishermen, that's the time. It's from July through late September. We're not getting a lot of precipitation. It's hot. They're keying in on dragonflies, damselflies, cicadas, all sorts of beetles, all sorts of things. And then, that bottom bite is good too. So, we're fishing some like hellgrammite flies, some, crawdad flies, and mixing that into the program. But I mean, still, July 15th, it's not uncommon for a client to catch a 20-inch smallmouth on, a swim fly is what we call them. That's kind of like our program here in Virginia is running that kind of tried and true, program that was pioneered by guys like Blaine Chocolate, who's a Virginian, and then guys like Mike Schultz from the Midwest, running that swim fly program. Even midsummer can produce some big fish. But for the most part, the guys that I have from now on, they want to fish topwater, so bugs, and topwater bait fish, things like that, because that eat is really cool.
Yeah.
And honestly, when it's low and clear, sometimes that is your best bet, not only for big fish, but for numbers of fish all day.
Gotcha. And so when I'm looking at fish like this, and you're saying they're 21 inches, you don't weigh them, but you just know by size. I mean, are you looking at, I'm talking about gear now, is this 7-weight rod, 6-weight rod, or are you going higher than that?
Yeah, so typically, March and April, I'm running pretty much 8 weights.
Okay.
And a lot of it is, casting the flies, the lines, and then also the fish. I mean, that fish that's up right now is a 21-inch fish. That was a post-spawn fish. That could have been caught on a 7-weight. Once late April rolls around and we get low and clear water, and even like earlier in April because it was low and clear, I'm like a nerd for this stuff. So like I'll switch to a 7-weight, even with bigger flies, and maybe make people suffer a little bit more, or when I'm downsizing in the flies. give them that 7-weight, because the 7-weight intermediate line lands softer
Yeah.
than the 8-weight intermediate line. Those are things that, we think about, that maybe a lot of people don't. And so,
Right.
That fish could have been caught on a 7-weight easily. We don't normally, I used to run some 6-weights for some like foam bugs in midsummer. But some of the fish that we've got in the new river, at times made me wish I didn't have a 6-weight in somebody's hands, and, it caused us to lose fish.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've gone to where for smallmouth, I'm pretty much using 7 and 8 weights year round. During the summer, it's pretty much all 7 weights.
7-weight.
Now you could use an 8 weight. These fish are slimmer. That's a post-spawn fish. That fish was probably a pound and a half heavier, spawn.
Right.
And so would have required an 8 weight. So, a 7-weight is going to do what you need it to do in the summer for sure.
And when I'm looking at, I'm going to pull up this picture full here because you mentioned, like 3 to 4 inch or 5 inch, swim bait type flies. I mean, you need a heavier weight rod, 8 weight, to probably throw something like that. I'm just looking at the cone of the head on that. I mean, that's a pretty stout fly.
Yeah, that was a 6-inch fly, big bird.
Right.
That thing was 6 inches long, I think, and tied for that, those water scenarios, tied that just a couple days before that trip. And it's hard to tell because our rivers are super green anyways. I mean, they're greenish, but really clear. That water was extremely dirty and running super high. So that was, again, a post-spawn scenario date. But, we're adjusting, we're throwing things that we might have thrown in late March, sometimes in mid-May, because we have to, because of water conditions. So, and that's something that they can see at that time, and when they're smashing bait fish, in high, dirty water, sometimes it requires something like that. And all these flies we're throwing are just exactly what you said. Like, the Game Changer was developed in Virginia, for our rivers, for the New and the James. And, that's a swim bait. That's all that is.
Right.
The Swing and D, which was in that picture, that's just a fluke, and that's what's cool about about fly fishing for predatory species now is that, it's the evolution of the flies has matched, kind of the gear world a lot. And, it's a lot of innovative guys like Blaine Chocolate and Mike Schultz that probably got sick of watching guys catch big fish on flukes, and they were like, and swim baits, and they were like, screw that, I want to catch those too,
and do it on a fly rod. So they design a fly that makes it look like that, and they create the same motion and all. Right? Yeah. That's all it is. I mean, that fly is the fluke, and so that's like what we're jerk bait, right.
And so that's what's fun about it, and that's what's cool about smallmouth and muskie is they're like a lot of the innovation in gear, comes from the smallmouth and largemouth world, and so it's kind of fun. Obviously, I think there's more limitations in fly fishing than there is in the gear world for sure, but
right.
We can't imitate everything, but the things that smallmouth love to eat in our rivers, we're largely able to emulate. So it's pretty cool. So
it is very cool. You mentioned the other type of species that you do target, and I quickly went to the picture that I came off because I didn't want to get into that yet. But here we go. Muskies, I mean, as you said, some of your rivers, 40 to 50 inch muskie is not out of the question. When are you targeting this? I think you said it a little bit earlier, kind of starts in October and goes to like February, but then there is some overlap in May and June as well.
Yep. Yeah, so, that was a late February fish. That was a really, thick, healthy female fish. And so, no, you're right. It's not uncommon to catch, 40, 50 inches. Those are the landmarks in muskie, just like 20 inches or 5 pounds is in smallmouth. And so we've got, two healthy fisheries, to attain 40 to 50 inch small or muskie, and they even exceed 50 inches at times. So it's predominantly I'm running muskie trips from November to late February, and a lot of that is dictated by the fact that I'm still running smallmouth clients.
Right.
I could run a lot of muskie in October. I could run a lot of muskie in May, and even early parts of June, depending on water temperatures. But a lot of it is just I'm doing mainly smallmouth trips. But yes, there's that overlap. I guess we'll kind of break it down. So like October, they're coming off the summer period. Water's way too warm to be fishing for them. Nobody should be fishing for muskie.
Right.
July, August, even early parts of September sometimes. When water exceeds 80 degrees, the delayed mortality is high, like really, really high. And those fish are, they're kind of sensitive kitty cats, but like they will swim off strong and hard, thrash out of your hands, but they're probably going to die later from buildup of lactic acid. And so, we don't target them at all, July and August, advocate for people not doing it themselves as well. September, depending on the year, like, you could start to target them again, late parts of September. But for the most part, we play it safe. I don't book muskie trips in advance before October 1st.
Gotcha.
I don't want people to have to call people and be like, hey, I know we booked September, 17th, 20th, 25th, whatever. It's still just a little too warm, and then we have to do the schedule, rigmarole.
Right.
And so I just do October 1st, sometimes October 10th. And then, start doing that the fall period. Super transitional. They're kind of spread out. They're coming off those springs, those creeks, the cool water influence that, they're using to survive all summer. And then they're spreading out again, almost like they do in the spring, post spawn. And they'll be, at the heads of runs. They'll be in seam water where you'd find bass. They're all over the place. They're, sitting in no water by grass edges and islands. And then they're eating because they just came off of an arduous summer where they're eating primarily at night, and they're eating super infrequently, even for muskie. I mean, they don't eat often because their metabolism is so slow.
Interesting.
So that's the inherent nature, the inherent difficulty of catching them is related to their metabolism and not their intelligence, which is a misconception. You can be doing everything right, fishing hard, fishing right, and not see one on the fly all day. It just happens. And anybody who tells you otherwise is lying to you. I've seen some of the better muskie anglers in the country skunk. It just happens. They're a hard fish. And we try to tell people that, like, they're cool. They're very much as I hate to call them this, like they're like a picture fish, a bucket list fish. They're my favorite. It's a love-hate relationship where basses love. But they're really cool. But they're spread out then. And then as you start to get in that like Thanksgiving time zone, that's when they're going to start to condense into their winter pools. And, that's when I primarily like to fish for them anyways, is December through late February. That's kind of like the peak season. They're putting on weight, pre-spawn, which is typically, they're going to spawn the later parts of March, early parts of April. But, it's one of those things where when they're condensed and they're feeding in those winter pools, that's when I really like to fish for them, because you're throwing 10, 12-inch flies, which I wish I had some of them handy to show you. But, 10, 12-inch game changers and things like that for them. And that's what we try to tell people too about muskie is it's about the bite, not so much the fight. The fight is, I think Josh talked to you about this when he was on here, it's like fighting a gorilla in a phone booth. They're gonna bend that rod, or I've seen them break rods. And they're gonna go on hard bursts like little runs, but you're never gonna see your backing. It's not a tarpon. Their body is not shaped that way. It's not meant to move that way. Short bursts of speed, and they're efficient killers. When they want to eat, they're gonna eat, and when they don't want to eat, they are not gonna eat.
Yeah, and I think it was Josh, when I had him on in November, I think he said that it is possibly the hardest fishing there is, because you could cast all day and never have a chase. Like, as you just said, I mean, you could be doing everything right, and the fish just aren't at that metabolism where they want to eat right at that point.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I've been out with Josh and Blaine and other friends of mine that are, seasoned muskie anglers and not seeing a fish all day. I mean, and it happens,
Right.
and that's the way it is, the inherent nature of muskie fishing. But I think that's what also kind of makes them special,
Right.
is that when you do put one in the net, that is like the coolest moment. And I often like tell people this too, where it's like I'll guide smallmouth all day, and the guy in the front sometimes like will outfish the guy in the back, or the angler in the back, and they'll be fighting to switch, right? And there's less camaraderie in a smallmouth float for sure, and then in a muskie float, the person in the front or the person in the back may catch that muskie, and the other person and me are just as excited for them as they are for themselves.
Right.
It's like a really special thing. Like when it all comes together, it's like it's all hugs, high fives, bourbon,
Because
and
it's
a
all
lot
the
of times
work.
we're sitting there for 15 minutes, and it's not even my doing, it's their doing, where they're both just like let's just chill for a second and just like let soak that moment up. And that's a really cool thing, and I think that's where they're kind of like, I've called them hillbilly permit. They're hard to catch, and it just like permit. And and so when it comes together, it's really cool, and I get to watch that, you know not every day, but close to every day.
Yeah.
And it's a really cool thing. I do love it.
When you're going after fish like this, and you said you're throwing 10 to 12-inch game changers, getting back to gear here, are you using a 10 weight rod, 11, 12? I mean, it's got to be relatively big, or are you using like a 9?
Yeah, so I'm using 10s, 11s, and 12s.
Oh, okay.
A lot of times from December to February, I don't touch a 10 weight. If it's super low and clear in December, which that happens, this past December was super low and clear, I was using intermediate lines. I was scaling down on the fly size, so I was using 7, 8 inch flies,
Hmm.
less flash, stuff that hovered more. And then January, the rivers filled, and got green. And so I was using primarily 11 and 12 weights and those 10, 12-inch flies. And then I was also using, your 500 grain full sinking lines.
Right.
And so it is, Josh, kind of touched on this too. It's it's definitely arduous for sure, and we are cognizant of the fact that people are working their tails off, and we are too.
Hmm.
And we definitely we kind of have to toe a line with people, and I think I've gotten pretty good at it, where it's like, all right, like somebody will call about muskie, and they're like, I just bought my first fly rod. I saw pictures of muskie on the website or on wherever, in some magazine, whatever, and or on Instagram, and I'm like, I have one. And I kind of have to like call, or gently talk to them about, like, look, like, this is a fly fishing's a journey, right? As cheesy as that is to say,
Yeah, it
but
is.
it's a journey. It's a marathon, not a sprint. So it's like, come out. Our smallmouth program, from summer into spring, whatever, is maybe a little bit different than a lot of other guide services programs.
Hmm.
And we're hunting the biggest fish, and I'm like, look, this can translate into muskie. Just give me a little bit, and we can work and get there. I can get you to where your casting is right, where hunting a fly is right, because so much of that is important, right? Somebody can cast 60 feet, with these rods, but if they don't know how to hunt a fly, or if they're not receptive to the instruction to hunt that fly, and that's such a big part of our game with smallmouth and muskie, and it's something that we pride ourselves on, is getting people tuned into hunting a fly the way that we are doing it in our program. It's because a swing and D may be a fluke, a game changer may be a swim bait, but if you're not fishing it correctly, it's not those things, right? And if you're not feeding the fish they want it the way they want to be fed, sure, you can catch smaller fish, all day, but the fish may elude you. And that's part of our program, is kind of carrying that torch that Blaine created, and trying to get people to where we're looking for the fish, and we're happy to go out there. I guide plenty of people where they're like, hey, I just want to catch fish all day. And that's great. I may alter the program a little bit. I may not alter it at all
Hmm.
seasonally. But it's one of those things with muskie where it's like hunting a fly is such an important aspect. And it's like, well, come out with me when we can smallmouth fish and hunt, a swim fly or a game changer, and we're going to get more results throughout the day, more feedback.
Mm-hmm.
And then we can translate that to a muskie trip. Because a lot of, like I said, you can hunt like a muskie fly the right way all day, and you may not ever get feedback.
Right.
Or, you may move 6 fish and never even hook one, or you may hook 3 fish and never catch one. And so I've seen every scenario. I've seen first cast muskie, I've seen last cast muskie, like sun going down, we shouldn't be on the river still, muskie, and I've seen sun coming up, frozen guide muskie, and so it's one of those things where I think that if people are willing to work with us, that's what we pride ourselves on doing is understanding, kind of what makes them tick and how to hunt these flies the right way.
And I think Austin, I think that's an incredible way to talk about it, because I think I know myself, right? I started fly fishing 30 years ago on a small stream in upstate New York for brookies and browns. And relatively speaking, it was dry fly or caddis. You kind of lay it out there, no splash. And the fly kind of does the work as long as you don't do any drag. The fish is going to come up and take it. You're not working, or as you say, hunting the fly. But then when you get into stripers or shad, you're moving the fly differently. You're starting to work the fly in the water. And I think I totally get it. I mean, if you're not receptive to what you're saying as a guide, me as a client, to move that fly a certain way, to strip it certain ways, to pause and whatever, then I'm just wasting your time and my money. I've got to listen.
Sure. And I don't want to have that sound like a turnoff as much, because what's cool about it is when you learn to, because I may have came off that way.
You didn't.
What's cool about like learning to hunt a swim fly or a big game changer is that it's fun.
Yeah.
And when they receive it well, it works, and it normally translates to some of the biggest fish you've ever seen. It's this year with smallmouth, between the 4 of us, every day we saw personal bests, saw citation fish. Mm-hmm. We had an incredible spring season. This winter muskie season was great. There was only 3 of us at that point, but a great muskie season. Saw a lot of first muskie, saw a lot of personal best muskie, etc. And I think that when people buy into the program,
right,
and this isn't unique to us. Like I said, I mean, Josh has been good friends with Blaine for a long time. Was always the second boat. Mm-hmm. It's just gotten to the point where we run a lot more closely with him now. And then, the boys in Michigan we're super close with, they run the same program as us. When you buy into the program, you see the results. And that's what's cool about it, is that they speak for themselves. And so a lot of that is just when you understand how to hunt flies, the specific flies that we're fishing, specifically, and then it just translates to, great fishing opportunities. And that's what we love about it. And also it opens people up to new things too. A lot of times people come to us, never thrown anything but a clouser for smallmouth, and clousers are great. They work on every fish, and plenty of big smallmouth eat clousers. It happens,
right?
But I think there's something unique and special about feeding a smallmouth in a seam with a swim fly. Right. Watching that visual eat. Watching that 20-inch, 21-inch fish eat a pink and white game changer and green water, and we all get to see it and all go, oh, it's like such a cool thing, whereas, with a clouser or deceiver, you may never see that eat.
Correct.
And that's still great. I mean, watching that line jump and seeing a big fish jump is still be cool. Don't get me wrong.
Right.
That's how I started fishing for him. So, but yeah, that answer your question, is I think that muskie, it's kind of this, we look at it the same way as like when somebody books a tarpon trip. A lot of people come to us and they're like, I fished for tarpon for 4 or 5 days and we didn't catch a single tarpon. And, again, this isn't meant to sound negative in any way, but I'll look at their first cast and I'm like, okay, that may be part of the reason. Right. And there's nothing wrong with that. We all start somewhere. And like I said earlier, this is a marathon and not a sprint.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of times people try to jump into certain species before they're equipped, and your money may have been better spent 5 years down the line after some, previous instruction.
Yeah.
And that's what I try to tell people. Circling back here,
You're
long
good.
circle, but big circle. But I think that it's one of those things where I try to gently tell people, like, look, let's start with smallmouth because they are more agreeable. And big smallmouth are not easy to catch. You work for them still, but we can grow. Come see me in July. Let's put a bunch of smallmouth in the boat. And then come see me in August and September, and let's put some bigger smallmouth in the boat on top water. And then come see me in March and April, and let's put the biggest smallmouth we've caught together in the net. And the heaviest smallmouth in the net. And then, let's graduate to muskie fishing. And I have a lot of clients that's how that happened. There was a gentleman right beforehand in one of the Robbie right there.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Robbie fishes with me, all the time, multiple days a month. And he was so, he was actually the opposite, where he was not receptive to muskie fishing at all. And I was like, Robbie, you're a fantastic angler. We should, you should consider coming out and muskie fishing. And he was like, yeah, I did it one time and didn't see one with, in some other state. And I was like, look, man, I think this would be great. Now he's hooked. And Robbie caught 3 with me. Robbie's actually the other guy. He was the one with the muskie that you were showing me.
Okay.
And then, well, no, and it's all good. I mean, that's Scott.
I'll get Scott to that. Too. I'll go right.
Scott's great too. Of course, Scott will probably see it. But yeah, Robbie, he's holding a big smallmouth in another picture as well. And he was, I think we were 3 for 3 on muskie this year, and every single one of them was north of 40 inches, and that was the biggest one. That one was, I think, 44 inches long, and I think he hit a 41 and a 42. He hit the 41 and the 42 in the same day, and so now he's hooked. I fished him the other day for bass, and he was like, "Man, this is great. I'm having a good time." But I'm like really looking forward to November, And I was like, "Oh, see, like, you've been ruined," and so. That's one of those things where, that's kind of the muskie success story. We talked about the hard days. There are some really sweet days too. When they want to eat and when they want to show themselves, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And so, it's even the follows are wins. The hookups are wins, even if we don't get them to the net. I mean, not every muskie I see hooked comes to the net.
Sure.
In fact, I'd say a lot of them don't come to the net because they're really good at throwing a hook. I mean, I can't tell you how many we put in the net where as soon as I tell you to release tension on that line and there's any slack, that fly just falls out of that big, toothy, bony mouth. And it makes you think they were never hooked at all, but they want to kill things so bad that they clamp, and even under a tense fight, they will hold on.
Wow.
And that's pretty cool. I think that's what's special about muskie is they're apex killers. They lie in dormancy and they sleep most of their days of the week. And then when they're ready to kill, they kill. I mean, it's pretty cool. They're like dragons.
Right. Right. Yeah. So I want to circle back and make sure I get this point. You did not come off because you thought maybe you came off with bad in terms of the hunting of a fly. I thought it was really well stated that you need to fish a certain way. So I think that was really, really well presented. So yeah.
Oh no, and I think that was more so. I thought maybe I came off.
Yeah, no, not at all.
A little jerky about it.
No.
But no, it's a I think that, and it's like I said earlier, it's like I'm happy we can grow together smallmouth fishing, right? Where it's we can start with flies that are going to just give us feedback all day, and we're going to catch smallmouth of any size all day. And then we can graduate to these advanced programs. And that's what's cool about, smallmouth is they give you the opportunity to fish from top to bottom with feedback. And, like I said, you can fish in April in Virginia with a clouser and still catch giant smallmouth. And that's really cool. But I think that it's cooler to catch them with a big, panker, chartreuse, and white.
Yeah, I get it for sure. Personally. So let's talk a little bit about clients, right? So a client is looking to go out with you. Let's stick with smallmouth. What is a typical day? He calls you up or he sends you a message. Hey Austin, I'm interested in hooking up with you. How far in advance should they look to book and that kind of thing? Because you said like you're pretty booked all summer at this point.
Yeah, so I mean, I do have availability, in July, and July is the least slim month for me. It always tends to be, I think, like where it fills in by the time that it gets around to it.
Right.
But summer is one of those time periods where I think a lot of times people call way closer to an actual trip.
Right.
And it's like all of a sudden then my July is fully booked. It's like once late June rolls around, it's like, oh, there goes my month. But I've got some availability in July, a little bit in August, a little bit in September, but those are kind of your peak bugging. And I will say in the summer, June, August, and September, you definitely need to get with me the furthest in advance.
Okay.
I would say, I tell people all the time, like 90 days out for the peak seasons, like that is kind of the safe bet. And then same with March and April, I am booked solid.
Right.
And honestly, 3 out of 4 of us are booked solid.
Wow.
And 4. So if people want to get with us for kind of the spring smallmouth, some of those pictures they saw today, of really thick fish, like you're going to have to get with us in December. And that's just how it is,
Right.
December, January, maybe February. There is 4 of us. So generally we can get you out with somebody. But if somebody wants to fish with Josh or I specifically, they should book well in advance for those peak seasons. Like I said, your March, April, May, June, and then August, September. And then some of those transitional months, October, I kind of like to take it easy because it's been a busy year.
Yeah.
So if I don't book 30 days straight in October, I'm kind of happy about it. I got to have some time off. And November is when I start getting busy for muskie again. My January this upcoming year is already completely booked. February is just about halfway filled in. December, I leave to a lot of my regulars, and I work all the way up till about the 22nd of December, and then I take off until about the 1st. And that's kind of like my little, family time.
Yep.
And so, those fill in quick. So if somebody wants to get with us in December, you want to fish with me specifically. But what's great about what we do is if you can't get on my or Josh's boat but you're fishing with Braden and Joe, we fish the same program. And those kids, they're both super young, not kids, young men, 19, and I think Joe is 24 or 25. They're extremely talented. We're super proud of them. They run the same program we do. And that's what's nice about it is if any of this sounds fun to somebody, we all fish the same way. We chat every day. We pride ourselves on it, and we don't hold back anything from each other. I want somebody to go out with Braden or Josh or Joe and, having the same incredible day that they would have with me, and that's the God's honest truth. So.
Right. And it's going to come back tenfold, too, because Josh is out. He's going to say, hey, Austin, we were in this area, and it was just, an absolute killer day. Or we fished this area, and we really didn't touch any fish. So you might want to avoid this, however that kind of works as you guys talk to that. So what is the length of a guided trip with you? Is it 6 hours, 8 hours? And when are you starting? I guess it might depend on the time of the year, too, because if I'm going from muskie, I'm not really want to be on the water at 6 a.m. in the pitch dark with frozen islets.
No, you definitely don't. And so muskie's tough because December, those are short days. So we've got a short window of time to fish, right? And we run on drift boats and rafts. If we can run a drift boat, we're always running a drift boat. There are some floats, no matter the flows, whatever, that we're running rafts. But, so people have to consider that, we're floating. And what's great about floating is it gets you into accesses that a lot of people can't get into. And so, with muskie, it's tough, like I said, because, we've only got a 9.5 hour, light period. Right. So those days, sometimes I'm asking you to meet me, as the sun's coming up, and then we're pushing off right at first light, and then we're taking out, as the sun's going down, and it's because we ran a 10-mile float or an 8-mile float, and and we only had so much time. Spring bass, you may meet us at 9 or 10 in March or April because the mornings are super cool and the bite is not going to get good until 11 noon anyways, until that kind of warms up. And then, in the summer, sometimes we're meeting at 11 a.m., because the afternoon and evening bite, people don't realize this, but some of my favorite smallmouth bass fishing is when everybody's eating lunch. And I think that's such a crazy misconception about bass, is that the midday bite is bad. That's like some of my favorite. So a lot of times then I'll start my days at 11 and I'll let all of those recreational kayakers and boaters and everything move through. And then you and I have got the river to ourselves until 7. And instead of eating lunch on the river, or we're starting at noon, fish till 8, instead of eating lunch, we're eating dinner.
Yeah.
And so, it's kind of fun. And so, we've got options, but for the most part, going back to how long the days are, we have a half day and a full day option. We do not fish by the clock. Our days are not, hey, it's 8 hours, we got to get out of here.
Right.
Hey, it's been 4 hours. I would say half days are tough because we have to pick a float based on a certain amount of mileage. So those days tend to be 4 5-hour days, 5 hours at max, because we have to, one, you're paying for a half day, and two, we have to pick the mileage based on that. So a lot of times those are more by the clock.
Gotcha.
It's not that we're trying to make them that way, but, full day, I'll fish you 12 hours. If we're fishing hard and we're grinding out for the smallmouth, like I've had plenty of days where I've fished for 10 hours, maybe not 12, but 10, 11 hours. And I don't fish by the clock. It's like I've done 13-mile floats for bass in an effort to watch somebody catch, the bass,
right.
or multiple the bass. And so, we pride ourselves on that, is that if I'm going to be out there, I'm just as vested in this as you are. It's like, that's what makes me happy. At this point, it's watching other people succeed in fishing makes me happier than catching them myself. And again, that probably sounds like a lie and sounds cheesy, but it's the truth.
Yeah. And so as a client, you supply all the gear. Am I bringing my rods? Because I certainly don't have a 12-weight rod, right? So I'm assuming you have it all, including the flies, tippet material. And I'm just bringing like my bag lunch, or you even supplying the bag lunch?
So we don't do lunch. We pull over for lunch.
Right.
Like if you want to do lunch, we have Yeti coolers on the boat,
right.
Ice packs. We supply water. I can keep electrolyte powder, things like that.
Right.
And a lot of times I'll keep emergency granola bars. I've had low blood sugar events from people on my boat that I'm thankful I've had a granola bar.
Right.
But yeah, we don't do lunch, but everything's provided, and we use such like specific niche stuff that sometimes I think it's easier for people to use our stuff, and then when they're curious about it, we're open books. So like you can text us at 8 p.m. and be like, what was that rod that I used on your boat that one day, and that line and that reel, and why did we use that line? Why did we use that fly? You know what I mean? It's like we're using such niche stuff. But if somebody wants to bring rods, when they book a trip, just tell us, and we may be able to use your rod. But if you don't know that you want to buy the line yet, like a full intermediate or something, we can just throw my reel on your rod. Like,
right.
and we respect that. I have rods that I love using, and I would rather catch fish on my rod. And
right.
so if people want to do that, they're more than welcome to bring their own tackle. We use a lot of niche specific flies. And so, we provide it all, but if somebody wants to bring it, if somebody wants to know what to tie beforehand, I love those conversations. We all do. Yeah. So, they can just reach out. I'm an open book, like I said, and I can kind of tell you what we're using, what's going to work that day.
Sure.
And you may not need everything that I have, but if you want some of it, or to bring some of it, to use something to catch a fish on a fly that you tied, I love that.
Yeah. I think there's, no matter what you're going for, there is something exciting about catching a fish on a fly that you have tied. From trout to salmon to muskie to smallmouth. I think no matter what it is, it's like I was able to fool that fish with something I tied, right? There's that feather in the cap, so to speak.
Absolutely.
Speaking of, I mentioned salmon because I want to quickly talk about this. You mentioned at the top of the talk today, you started guiding in Alaska. And you did that for a number of years, and you and Josh worked at an outfit up there. I don't remember the name, and you could certainly name drop it. That doesn't bother me. What was it like? Because I know it's a completely different world. I did Alaska in August of 24, and it was the most incredible place I've ever been. It was awesome.
Yeah, I tell people all the time. I mean, it'll ruin you, and and especially Braden went up there his first season at 18 years old to guide, and I was like, you're ruined for the rest of your life. Like a young man like that, I was like, you're toast. Nothing will ever seem as cool. But yeah, it's a really cool place, and I tell people all the time, like that is the place. I think if you were to pick one fly fishing destination before we kicked the bucket. That's where everybody should go. And out of respect to every other fishing destination, but yeah, it's a really cool thing. And so I worked at Naknek River Camp. Jim Johnson owns that. He also owns Katmai Trophy Lodge, which I worked for in the late seasons. And that's just actually I think it's 12 miles downriver from the lodge that I worked at. So he owns two lodges on the same river. And it's all 5 species of salmon. Kings, silvers, pinks, chums, and sockeye. Sockeye is what most people know.
Yep.
Silvers, I think, are fairly, your cohos are fairly common as well. And then kings, your Chinook. Kings are your biggest, followed by silvers, then your sockeyes, and then your chums and pinks. And then, the Naknek has the world's largest rainbow trout. Rainbow trout that can hit 36 inches long. They're essentially steelhead. I mean, the Naknek it's kind of like a destination for people who love steelheading and want to catch a bunch of, kind of steelhead in one day, and kind of like what it used to be, I would imagine, in Oregon and Washington. Because we had a really cool spay program up there, which was new to me. Somebody who grew up in the South, I had never
saw a 14-foot rod before.
No, I rarely saw people fly fishing when I was young. I mean, it's super popular now. You see people fly fishing now all the time, but when I was young, you didn't see anybody. I didn't even see anybody fly fishing. So when I got up there and the owner was like, do you have any two-hand spay experience? I was like, no, I grew up in Southern West Virginia, man. I was like, I don't know what any of this is, but I will figure it out. Right. And so it's a really cool thing. And then fishing beads, which I worked at a lodge that has very low turnover, and this is going to sound biased, but I think the best guide staffs between those two lodges, the best guide staffs in Alaska. And the reason being is that most of those guys are there for 10, 12 years.
That's a huge deal.
And that's a huge thing. And so it was kind of intimidating for somebody like me, who my trout experience was in, some tailwater, your Jackson Smith, but mainly creeks, right? And so when we would do flyouts and fish across the lake in the small feeder creeks, I felt comfortable. I felt at home. That's it's very much just like nymphing at home or dry fly fishing at home, skating mice, whatever. On the big river, it's crazy. The Naknek's big, it's fast, it's deep, and those rainbows match that energy. And it's really cool. And like I said, you've got Josh is up there now. Braden will be there, I think July 1st or late June.
Right.
Joe is on a separate river, the Kenai, which is also known for some of the biggest rainbows in the world. It's a really cool thing. I mean, it's totally different than here. It's like one of the, I would wake up every night to take a leak and walk out of my cabin to take a leak, and there'd be a 800-pound brown bear
just hanging on the corner.
Yeah, and you're not even on the corner; he's just off your porch, and you're like, "This is incredible." But it's terrifying, but it's incredible. But for the most part, that's part of the fun up there, is that it's not only is the fishing incredible, the views are incredible. I mean, we were right there by Brooks Falls, which, if you've ever seen a screensaver on a laptop or on your TV of bears catching,
fish
salmon
in the
out of
mouth,
falls, Yep, it's at Brooks Falls, and Brooks Falls flows into the Naknek Lake, which flows into the Naknek River. So we would actually take people on lake boats across the Naknek Lake, which those mornings when it's glassed out on that lake and blue, and you're taking that 35-minute ride across that lake to Brooks, it's beautiful. I mean, I would just put my headphones in, listen to music, and there's nothing like it. And then you get to go do those things. You get to go see bears in their environment. We would see moose, wolves, golden eagles everywhere, bald eagles everywhere. And then the fishing,
Right.
I called it glory guiding. You're everybody's favorite guide in Alaska.
Because
right?
it's an aquarium. I mean,
yeah.
And what I wonder, and I had another guy on a couple of weeks ago, and he pointed this out, and he's 100% right. What was it like 50 to 100 years ago before Alaska became this thing where all these fly fishermen go to? It must have been even stupider than it is now. And now it's crazy, in terms of the amount of fish that you can catch. Yeah.
One of my favorite things, it's like here, you'll cycle through flies on tough days. Smallmouth can be tough at times, right? And it's like you adjust and you adjust and you adjust, and you can make a bad day into a good day or a decent day, whatever.
Right.
There, it was like, it felt like nothing you could do was wrong. And that's what was incredible about it, is like, if I was there to take you to where I knew the fish were, right? And it was like, there was days where, up there, clients would be like, well, why don't we try this? And I'm like, sure, because it'll probably work. It's like, it's like, it kind of got fun. And then there's this thing that would happen there that rarely happens here, where I would unhook a fly or a bead, and their line would be going down the creek, and I would be taking pictures of whatever, rainbow or dolly or grayling.
Something else already on.
And then I'm hearing their reel go,
yes.
And then I'm like, well, reel that one in and let's take a picture of both of them. It's like, it's incredible where it's just, they're, and a lot of that is they have a short feeding window, right? And so most of the year, a lot of the year, it's, uninhabitable. It's like, frozen in, looks like Hoth, it's like, it's crazy. And so when they can eat, and when the fish, or, when the salmon are dropping eggs and flesh and all these things, they pack it on, and they pack it on quick. And don't get me wrong, I've had tough days in Alaska. A lot of it was we were on creeks that we thought the salmon were going to be there, in late June, early July.
They hadn't made it there
just
yet.
Not gotten there yet.
Yep. Yeah.
And if there's no salmon, there's hardly anything else. No dollies, no grayling, no rainbows. And so I've had days where, those were tough because there was very few rainbows to be had. Because those rainbows show up, it's probably the same way I did, and they're like, what the heck? Like, where's all the food? And I'm looking at them like, where's all the fish? But it's one of those things where it's just such a cool thing, because I don't think, and there's a reason that people, not only guides want to work there, but people want to go back every year, because those memories I have are some of the best fishing days I'll ever see. Right. Some of the coolest moments with kids and families, and older gentlemen, younger gentlemen, younger people, older people, where they're at the end, and this was always their bucket list. And it is one of those things where I tell people, and I would see this all the time, and I kind of notice these things, is like, a lot of people wait until it's like, hard to go up there.
Yeah.
And doing some of these flyouts, like I would drag, there was 80-year-old men that I would take on 7-mile walks, through the tundra to get to a creek. And that's a tall order.
It is.
Sometimes it's like, it's one of those things. Life passes you by, and then all of a sudden you got to do it when you can, right? But I try to tell people all the time on my boat here, when they're like, I want to go to Alaska at some point, I'm like, just do it like soon, the next 20 years, because if you can experience every part of Alaska, and I saw some guys there that couldn't experience every part of it because of limitations. But if your guide can tell you, hey, we should do this fly out on this creek tomorrow, and the bushwhacking is going to be a little tough, but the fishing is going to be something you're going to remember for the rest of your life. Yeah. Like, that's when you want to go to Alaska, is when you can say yes.
You hit it on the head, Dita. So our trip, it was 6 days of fishing. We went. We were on the Kvichak River, Great River, right? And then so one fly out took us to the Little Coup, which was polluted with red, salmon, and it was, Rainbow City,
Yep.
and it was just like, our guide goes, okay, so this is, oh wait, fish on, he's like, this is how you
Yep.
get it. It was just, it was crazy. It was.
So you flew into Peanut there, or did you fly into the Big Lake? Because like Little Coup was that was one of my favorite flyouts, and it is insane.
But you're right. That it was a 3.5 to 4 mile walk over the tundra, up the hill, down the hill, right? Because yeah,
And so they may call it something different there, but we call that Peanut Lake, and that was one of those hikes that I would take fellas, through, and they would be like, when we got to the bottom of it, to the river, they would be like, I'm going to kill you, Austin.
Right.
I'm going to kill you.
And then you're like, I hate to tell you, but we got to go back up that damn hill.
Yeah, we got to go back up it at the end of the day after I've hiked you 3 miles down
the river. Right?
Yeah, and then back up the river.
But so, we had a bunch of groups. We had 6 guys, so it was 2 fly out. It was 1 fly out, 2 guys a day. So the first group that came back, they were like, the hike is killer, but the fishing is so incredible. And so we knew what to expect, and really you're on such a high after that because I landed a 31-pound rainbow, a 31-inch rainbow, and I was a pig, and I was like, this is unbelievable, So it was awesome. It really was.
That river, it's insane. The quality of fish that are in that river. That was one of my favorite flyouts, and then we could go on about this for forever. I've got plenty, and I mean that's what's cool about that place is so like where you went on the Kvichak. You've got your like kind of 3 sisters there. You got the Kvichak, the Alagnak, the Naknak, and they're all flowing like into the Kvichak Bay there in Bristol Bay. And that's a hotbed for lodges and for fishing in Katmai. But there's other places, north of there where you can go, and creeks that I've probably never heard of, and it's like, no matter where you go in Alaska, I think in Southwest Alaska, no matter where you go, there's really not a bad place, right? I mean, you can always, like I said, I'm a big fan of Naknek River Camp and Katmai Trophy Lodge. Jim is probably going to be the best boss I've ever had.
Right.
Hopefully I'm never going to have another one, but, it's one of those things where, that guide staff is fantastic. You get some of the best fishing in Alaska there. But I have a lot of friends that worked on the Kvichak. And there's a lot of lodges there, or, at least a few where that guide staff is amazing. The accommodations are amazing. The lodging's great. And that's what's great about Alaska is you can't really, it's so hard to get in sometimes that sometimes you got to just pick a lodge, right? And so, and you can't really go wrong, whether you're on the Kvichak.
You can't. There are some. Yeah, there are some sketchy ones, but you're gonna make the best of it. But to your initial point, though, the first day that we're out on the river, I'm staring at everything but the fact that I'm on this amazing river. Like I'm like, there's moose, there's fox, there's bald eagle. You're gold. I was just like, you're in a zoo.
Yep.
That's so natural, and then the water, you're seeing 15 feet down and looking at the pebbles like it's crystal clear. The whole thing was just incredible. Yeah. So,
I've got incredibly fond memories of that place. And you said the foxes. Those were honestly my favorite animals up there. They're so friendly there, and it's like I love foxes here.
Right.
And then they're like the most incredibly friendly foxes in America or in Alaska. I had them come into my cabin before and sleep under the bed, like things like that. It's just one of those things where it's incredible.
Yeah. All right. We can talk about Alaska all day, but you're done going to Alaska. You did your thing up there. It is a tough 17 to 19 week season, depending on what it is, because for you guys as guides, it is a grind because it's Saturday, people leave. Saturday evening, people come in. You're cleaning gear, getting it ready, flip it over. And I never saw guides work so hard. Just day in and day out. And, it's every day. It's incredible. But it's what makes the experience for someone like me, we truly appreciate it. So,
yeah. And that was one of the cool things up there is that I think that client, and when I worked up there, much like here, at this point here in Virginia, I've got the same scenario where it's like I see the same people on the same dates every year. And Alaska was a lot of the same way. And it was like, you got to know them personally, and they were super appreciative. I got to know their kids and, their wives and whoever else, right? And their parents, grandparents, whatever. And you get to, that's one of those things up there that I think is so cool, is that there's so much effort that goes into it, and it's very much appreciated by the clients. Like it's controlled chaos,
right?
Running an Alaskan lodge. The fact that Jim does it for two of them, with a ragtag group of boys from the South and Michigan, some blue collar boys, but the fact that he's able to do that, God love him. But it's like everything can go wrong in Alaska. It's like, and it never really seems to go wrong. It's how it doesn't. Looking back on it, I don't know.
Because
but
if something goes wrong, it's not like you can run across the street to Lowe's. There's no Lowe's, for a couple hundred miles.
No, everything's flowing. On the Knack we were lucky because we had a hardware store an hour drive away through the bush. But in Knack, the actual port town. But, and then we would go to the hardware store and it'd be like, I don't even know, a can of paint was like $30.
Right.
And you're like, oh man, like we had an old building, like a shed fall over, and it's like, that's going to cost us $30,000 to build a new shed. It's like, people don't realize how much work and how much money goes into Alaskan lodges because it's so remote.
Right.
And places on the Kvichak the same way, places on the Alagnak. I mean, it's just, and there's lodges that are even more remote than those three rivers, where everything has to be flown in.
It's all flown in, and it has to be shut down, and everything has to be drained because winters are just ridiculously harsh. The weather, if you let something stand for 2 years, the weather just destroys the heck out of it. It's all over, So
winterizing.
It's crazy. All right, let me get back to this. Let me bring up Virginia Trophy Guides. Austin Conrad has been with me. World-class fishery right here in Virginia. The New River, the James. We're talking smallmouth, 21, 22 inches. Personal best, he said, all spring is going to have great. It was a great spring. It's going to continue to be great this summer. And then, of course, as we get into November through March, it's muskie season, which you'll work hard at. But Austin and his group will work very hard to make sure you can at least get, hopefully, into one of these beautiful fish. It really is awesome. And again, it's VirginiaTrophyGuides.com is where you want to go. You can check out the guides. It's Josh and Austin are the two owners. There are two other guys, Braden, and I think you said Matt, John?
Joe, and he's actually not on the website yet. He's probably going to be pissed. I wish
if you want to
out, right?
If you want to learn more about the waters, you can do that, and of course, you can book now on the top right. Austin, it has been an absolute pleasure talking with you. Thank you so much for spending the time. It's been great, and I wish you luck for the rest of the summer. Not that you need it, but you are pretty busy, which is good for you for sure.
Yeah, thanks, man. I appreciate it. Thanks for having us on, and hopefully we'll get to do it again, give you guys some updates, and you'll have to get out there and do some fishing with me, Matt. I think we'd have a blast.
I think I would do the smallmouth so that we can work on the correct hunting of the flies. I know my limitations.
Right on. Well, whatever.
Very good. Hang out there for just a second. Again, my guest has been Austin Conrad of Virginia Trophy Guides. Please check them out, VirginiaTrophyGuides.com, and you can find out more about them on their website. Check it out. I mean, smallmouth, that was great pictures. It was incredible. All right, that's it for Off the Hook with Matty D. We'll see you again next time. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Off the Hook with Matty D.